Thanks, Maya. So myself and Yulia are both communication designers with brand and digital engagement within the wider communications portfolio. And today we're going to be splitting the presentation up into two parts. Yulia's going to go first and talk about how to talk about some fundamentals of design and how they can help you to recognize good design and create good design. And she will be taking a template, not from the Island Health templates, but from kind of standard Canva templates, and using that as an example. And then I will be taking over and talking through some changes that have been applied to the brand kit, the Island Health brand kit, and what those changes give you access to for anyone who has that access. So yeah, Yulia, I'll let you take it away.
Yep. Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you so much, Mia, for inviting us, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Yulia, and I'm a new communication designer here, as Stephen said. I was born and raised in Ukraine, and I moved to Canada 2 years ago after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Today's presentation is focused on Canva, and my part particularly is focused on design best practices in Canva. So when communicating designers evaluate the design, they look into whether it's inclusive, readable, well-structured, is it consistent, is it clear and easy to understand? And if the design lacks these characteristics, it's a bad design. And even if it seems visually appealing, it's still bad. So today's presentation is about Canva, and as much as I don't want to admit it, designers don't like Canva because it doesn't provide sufficient tools to ensure good design. And to explain what I mean, as Stephen mentioned, we'll look at Canva's own template for a poster, and we'll use it as a sort of a case study to identify the kind of problems this poster has, and we'll try to resolve it. And so to start us off, I highlighted all the things that are wrong with this poster, and we'll go step by step and look into all of them. By the way, if you have any questions as I speak that are related to some of the things that you hear, please feel free to type them in the chat and I'll try to answer them. So the first and foremost issue is visual clutter, which is the elements that hinder clarity, coherence, or ease of understanding. In other words, all the design elements that do not communicate information or help convey the idea behind the design are considered visual clutter. Some of the examples of visual clutter include pointless frames around your text, pointless frames and double frames, also pointless boxes. In some rare cases, these are appropriate, but if you use them, you must clearly understand the reasoning behind that. The other example of clutter are pointless lines and all sorts of dividers. Again, sometimes they're useful, but in most cases, the empty space does a better job dividing your content than lines. Next is purely decorative elements that we think look pretty or that we love. And even if we think they look extremely pretty or we love them a lot, they still are a visual clutter if they perform no function other than being pretty. Next is an overly decorative bullet points or just massive bullet points. Instead of adding subtle structure to the text, they stand out too much if they're so massive, and they visually disrupt the content because they are more prominent than the content itself. The next is any kind of space fillers. So if we see the white space in design, we don't necessarily need to fill it just for the sake of it not being empty. And if you're adding elements to your design with the sole purpose of filling out the space, these are most definitely visual clutter. And then finally is overly busy backgrounds, also considered a visual clutter. If we were to revisit our poster with this knowledge about visual clutter that we just obtained, we notice that all of these decorative elements around the content are visual clutter, as well as the pointless lines and borders. They are also visual clutter. We should delete them and have no regrets about it whatsoever. The next issue we'll examine is color contrast and how it affects the accessibility of the information we're communicating. Color contrast is the difference in brightness and hue between the text and the background it sits on. Contrast is a key aspect of accessibility in design because it ensures that content is readable and distinguishable. High contrast means the content is accessible, and low contrast means that it's not accessible. And these are some examples of color combinations from our own Island Health color palette. The ones on the left are highly accessible, and the ones on the right are hard to see and read because they offer little to no contrast. So if we assess our poster, we'll see that it would probably benefit from a higher contrast between the background and the text, and also from all the text being the same color. Having both black and white text sitting on the same color background is almost never a good thing for accessibility. So we can either make the text white and place it on dark background, or make the text black and put it on a light background. Both options are highly accessible, and we can go with either one of them. However, we also need to remember that colors always convey a certain emotional meaning. And I think that dark poster that I have here looks way too dramatic for the content that it's communicating. So I think that our best bet is to go with a light background. Does this make sense so far? Give me a thumbs up if it does. All right, so the next issue is visual hierarchy, which is the arrangement of elements to guide readers' attention and convey the relative importance of content. Hierarchy applies to all the elements in design, but we'll focus on typographic hierarchy today because our poster mostly consists of typographic content, text. When defining a typographic hierarchy, we are basically assigning the level of importance to various parts of text. The most important thing becomes the most visually prominent, and something less important becomes less prominent. In our poster, there are probably at least 3 levels of hierarchy. The most important text is the title, which is Hello, I'm Margarita Perez. The second level is the subheadings, which is about me, my experience, and my skills. And the last level is everything else. And if we visualize it, we'll have something like this. Let me click back and forth. So the most important element became the biggest, and all of the body text became the same size because it has equal level of importance. Okay, moving on. The next aspect of our process is learning about Gestalt principles and utilizing them to benefit our design. Gestalt principles are laws that describe how humans typically perceive visual information. And some of you are probably familiar with these, but to give you a bit of context, we'll watch a short video about it.
When looking at this, what's the first thing you see? Do you see a bicycle? Or do you see handlebars, pedals, spokes, tires, brakes, a seat, and a frame? If you're human, I'm guessing you saw a bike. This idea that we make sense of things by seeing a whole rather than the individual parts is called Gestalt psychology, and its principles are especially important for designers in creating complete and compelling visuals. Because of psychologists Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, and Wolfgang Kohler, Gestalt theory can be broken down into 6 design principles. Figure ground. The thought that when we look at a scene, we separate objects so that some are the focus or figure and others are the background. Similarity. The notion that we place objects with similar characteristics in a group. These characteristics can include color, size, font, shape, texture, and more. Proximity. The belief that we group together objects that are close to each other. Closure. The idea that our minds close objects that are not necessarily together or complete in order to create a whole. Continuity. The theory that we continue to follow objects that are visually aligned until they are interrupted. Order. The belief that alignment and symmetry are attractive and essential elements of design. When Gestalt principles are ignored, designs tend to look out of place or incomplete, forcing our eyes to focus on little inconsistencies rather than the greater whole. You may not know exactly what seems off, but you will feel something is out of place. The best designs, unintentionally, make the world feel a little less chaotic.
Okay, so the video mentioned 6 Gestalt principles, but with the development of UX design, this list was extended, and nowadays it's something like 8 principles. And we're not going to dive deep into all of these, but instead we'll zoom in on just a couple of them that are important for us in this particular case study that we're going through. So the first one is proximity. Proximity states that we perceive objects that are close to each other as being a part of the same group or as being related. And if we increase the distance between the objects within this group, we immediately perceive them as not being connected anymore. If we look at a poster, we'll see that some of the content that belongs together is not immediately perceived as a group because there's too much space between the parts of it. And I'm mostly referring to the subheading about me and the text that describes, that tells this, that provides this information, sorry, or like my experience, even in my skills, it's equally, the distance between that heading is the same to like the about me text and to the text about experience itself. So we need to move these objects together, the one that are belong together, we should bring them together. And if we were to do that, here is what it looks like. Let me click back and forth so you see the difference. So the other Gestalt principle that's not considered here is similarity. Similarity means that visually similar elements are perceived as related. And if we look at our title here, we can see that although it's a single sentence, hello, I'm Margarita Perez, it's not perceived as such because first part of it, first line looks so different from the rest of the text that our eye immediately thinks that it's some other content. And so to resolve that, we would need to make all the sentence the same typeface and the same size. And now as we look at it, even without reading, we perceive the title as being a whole. The next thing is composition. Composition is basically an arrangement of elements within a space with a goal of creating an impactful and harmonious layout that guides the viewer's eye and conveys a clear message. There is an almost endless list of factors that define successful composition. Some of them we already talked about when we discussed hierarchy and Gestalt principles in color. The other ones we're going to focus on right now, which are the guiding viewer's eye and considering the eye movement pattern. So in this part of the world, we read from left to right and from top to bottom. There are different eye movement patterns, such as Z pattern and F pattern that we talk about in design. But no matter what the pattern is, our eyes pretty much always moves from left to right and from top to bottom. And as designers, we can manipulate the viewer's eye and trick them into reading the content in the way we want them to. But that's a bit beside the point in our case. The main thing is to remember that when creating a composition, we must decide where we want the viewers to start scanning the content and how we want them to proceed. In the case of our poster, we probably want the viewers to start at the top left corner and move down in this Z pattern. And the next slide sort of shows how I rearrange this content so it follows the pattern that I established. This is the result that I was going for. This is pretty much what I wanted. But in this composition is well structured, it's clear and straightforward, but it's not the only way to arrange these elements. We can also do something like this, or maybe even something like this. The overall amount of successful compositions we can create here is nearly endless. But the main thing is to remember that our intention behind that we need to have an intention behind the placement and the look of each element, because this intention is what makes our composition successful. This intentionality guides the viewer's eye and effectively communicates the information. So the final issue we'll discuss in this case study is typography. We'll cover the good and bad practices of working with type. Typography is also probably the main reason why designers struggle with Canva, as it has an extremely limited number of tools that allow us to effectively work with type. One of the worst practices of working with type is using way too many fonts and font styles. When we do that, we send too many signals, which decreases our chances of communicating information effectively. 1 or 2 fonts is a good amount. 3 are too many, and more than that is a type crime. The next is font choice. There's so many bad fonts out there, and it takes practice to learn to identify them. So for now, I would advise you to use the fonts that you definitely know are high quality, like Island Health brand fonts. The next thing is tracking, which is the distance between letters. Canva allows you to easily adjust letter spacing, but I would strongly suggest you to not touch that setting at all, because very rarely, if ever, it makes things better. I would strongly advise to always stick to the default number of for this setting, which is 0 in Canva. The next thing is overuse of all caps for headings and blocks of text. Remember that all caps are a bit harder to read, so try to use sentence case instead whenever possible. The next thing is paragraph alignment. There are 4 types of paragraph alignment that we're all very familiar with. There are 3 which you should use cautiously or try to avoid, which is center text, align right, and justified. And there is the 4th one, align left, which we would recommend you to use at any point when you can. Use it whenever possible. It's the best alignment that allows for the text to be readable and legible. The next thing is line height. It's also something important to keep in mind. So when setting your line height, stick to somewhere between 1.15 and 1.6. Everything that's less is not enough, and everything that's more is too much. We unfortunately do not have a chance to set these parameters for you in Canva, but the rule of thumb is that you have to remember that Gestalt principle of proximity. If the lines get super far away from one another visually, they are harder to perceive as part of being a whole paragraph or block of text. Now with the headings, these numbers are slightly different and they're slightly smaller. So the good line spacing is somewhere between 115 and 1.3. I know that that's a lot to remember, but I would suggest to just an eyeball it and establish if this looks right to you or it isn't. And if it's not, then adjust it in Canva, but otherwise we're currently in the process of developing a new updated templates for presentations and other things in Canva, and in those we'll try to set up the values that are good, that are sufficient, and if you'll stick to those, you'll make no mistakes. The next thing is so-called ugly rugs. This is an extremely uneven right edge of text that should be avoided. If your design has an ugly rug, it's not the biggest crime in the world. It's fine, but if you can fix it, try to do that by adjusting the width of your text box. And the final thing is the widows, which is a single word in the last line of your paragraph. Try to avoid widows. And with all of this in mind, we're back to our poster. Typography here is not great. Lots of widows, ugly rugs, line height is a mess, but our biggest problem is the font itself. It's not legible and it's extremely hard to read. I suggest replacing it with something more legible and readable, along with adjusting all the other things. And this is what the final result looks like. If we compare what we started with and what it looks like, we see that our updated design is much more easier to grasp at a glance, to understand what it is about, even without reading all the content. And it overall looks much cleaner and professional. And if I were Margarita Perez, I would definitely go with our improved option. Yep, and that's all from me. And with that, I'll pass it on to Stephen, or take your questions if you have any.
Thanks, Julia. I'm just going to pick up where you left off. Oh, there's some questions coming in. I'll let you answer those.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat here. Are you choosing non-serif fonts for a reason?
Yeah, there is this eternal dialogue as to what's more readable and legible, sans serif fonts or serif fonts. And so right now, I think that the overall idea that everyone sticks to is that serif fonts are better for printed information, for books, for all sorts of things that we print, but sans serif fonts are better for everything that ends up in the screen. But in this instance, I relied on the fonts that Island Health is using, and both of them are sans-serif fonts. I hope that answers your question. If not, ask another one.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the next part, we're going to get into the brand kit. Can everybody see this? Great. Sorry, just going to move this window so I can see you all. And okay, so myself and Julia have worked on a number of updates that are now available in the Island Health brand kit. We're really excited about this. There's been a lot of questions and requests that have come in over time to update various things, and we have been keeping note of them and hope that we've addressed quite a number of them. So I'll get started. The first one is the expansion of our color palette. So these are the existing colors, and we've left those in, but we looked at them. We want to wanted to develop more of a system. So we looked at the colors, identified which ones were kind of the same hue, and we identified these 5, and then we created a variety of tints with these different colors. So the blues, our corporate blues, we have 7 versions of that. We have 3 of our yellow and 5 of the teal. And the number afterwards just indicates the lightness out of a scale of 100. These all have exactly the same hue, and they attempt to have exactly like a similar level of saturation. And then we also have 2 other sets of colors, which are for data visualization, for graphics and graphs and charts. And the reason we have 2 sets is one is for a light background on white or our lightest blue, and then the other one is for a dark background on black or our darkest blue. So here is an example of a bar chart on our lightest blue, and these have been tested for accessibility, and they all pass. And the same with our data visualization colors for a dark background. So they are all in Canva. Oh, before I get to that, I have a note here about pay attention to the order of your colors. We tried to consider color blindness when we were designing these colors. So this is color blindness for protanopia. There's different types of color blindness. So you can see that the blues and the purples all become blue, and then the reds and the yellows and the reds and the greens and the oranges all become various states of yellow. So we tried to have them with different saturations, different darkness, so different levels of contrast, so that even people who are colorblind will still be able to get information out of it. And here is a deuteranopia type. So here is the other set on dark, showing color blindness. And again, it's stark, the difference. So there are our data visualization colors. We also have a set of neutrals, which you'll be happy to know, including black. We only have black 15 because black 0 is actually hard on the eyes on digital screens. Yeah, there's too much contrast. There is such a thing. So another thing we've added a comprehensive icon library, 2 of them. These are open source libraries that we have modified, and they work together as a kind of broad system. So there are 2 of them. One is health icons. They come from healthicons.org, 650 health focused icons. It's a global, it's a volunteer effort to create a global good for health projects all over the world. So they're totally open source. The other one is Phosphor, which is another open source icon set. The next, I will show you how to use these in a moment. The next thing we have are fully customizable timelines. So I'm going to pop out of presentation mode, and you can all still see my screen. Yeah, I think you can. So I'm in Canva here, obviously. If I create a new page, now over on the left, we have our brand tab, and you will see that it's been very much fleshed out from what it used to be. And over on the left here, we have timelines. So I can open that up. And then here we have different types of timelines. So for a presentation like this, I think a horizontal one would be good. We also have a Gantt chart. So we can pop this in, and then you'll come in here. It's kind of confusing because they have these 2 buttons, but you don't click on the buttons. you click on the timeline that you want. So we click on it, and then it pops it in. And then once it's in here, the text is fully editable. You can add to it if you want. And then these are part of the icon set. So if we go back into our brand tab on the left, we can see we have icons. There's two folders, medical icons and general icons. So if we go into medical icons, we can search these. There are hundreds of them, but if you go in and search, say you want to get some PPE, you can find that in there. And once you click on it, it will just appear in the design. And then up the top, you can actually change the color. Please ignore all those colors. This is from Julia's Canva template. You'll probably just see these ones. And so you can change the color from in here to something that is accessible. And then you can just rescale it to replace the icon here. Or if you don't want to have icons on your timeline, you can also just delete them. So they are all there. We also have the general icons. There are many, many icons. Next up, we have editable charts and graphs.
Hey, Stephen, just before we move on to charts and graphs, there's a couple of questions in here. One from Joni about, are there other icons that you recommend as common language for teaching materials, like emoji-like icons for stop, safety issue, take note, internet-based resource link, etc., like standardized things that we've come up with at Island Health?
For like stop, safety issue, take note, internet-based resource link. No, we haven't necessarily identified those, but that is really good feedback. How about we take that one away? And myself and Julia are continually working on the brand at the moment. I'll talk more about what we're developing, but there will be a lot more things coming in the coming months. And we will, this is something we will address in that, and I'll have a better answer when we do.
It's a great idea to have that visual cue. Another question here from April. How do we access this brand kit or account?
Yeah, I'm interested to know how many people actually have access to the brand kit in this group.
Maybe put up your hand if you have access to the brand kit, meaning that your manager has put in a request for a paid Canva account for you. We have 11, 12.
Okay, so a number of you do. It is a paid, it's a paid thing. It's $20 a month per user, and people have to go through their manager to get it approved. That is where it stands at the moment. We are trying to, thanks Liz, it's worth it. We are trying to make this more accessible for everybody in all of these tools that we're developing. We are hoping to implement in Microsoft programs as well, and that will be coming. But for the moment, the best tools are still in Canva. Yeah.
I also wanted to make a note here that I had people reaching out to me, those who have that paid account with Canva and those who theoretically have to have access to this brand kit. They have access to an old version of it. So if you have Canva set up already and you don't see any of these updates, so please reach out to us and we'll try to address that.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. That's a really good point. So I know I'm running a bit short in time here. So the editable charts and graphs. So it's the same thing. If we go in here, we go into our brand folder, go into charts and graphs, and we have a number of different options here. Process flow, 2 different versions here that will come in. compare values. There's like 6 different varieties in here, and there's notes on when to use them, when to avoid. So there's, and they're all in our brand colors and ready to go. In the interest of time, I'll pop over to maps. So we have some editable maps. We will likely be adding some more. And exact same thing in here, maps. And a nice thing about these, once you pop it in, you can change the colors again up here. So if you want to just focus on one particular area, you can. They're fully scalable. They're all vector graphics, meaning they'll never pixelate. So you can make it as big as you want, and it'll be crisp and clear. So yeah. And then coming soon are updated typography styles. There are some in there, but there will be more coming. And then templates, which we are working on, and we expect to have a new presentation template in the next day or two that will be going. Yulia did a really good job of talking about best practices and really good rules on design. And some of our templates, I'm afraid, are not the best examples of that. So we are working on new and improved templates. And we want to ask you about what templates you want to see. So if you want to put any thoughts into the chat about things that you would really like to see, please do. We want to collect as much feedback as possible, because we don't know necessarily what everybody needs. Yeah. And thank you very much. And yeah, you can email either myself and Yulia or brand@islandhealth.ca with any feedback. We'd like to take any questions that you have for either of us.
Thank you so much, Stephen and Yulia. I'm going to stop the recording so that we can have the cone of silence for any questions we may have. So just give me a moment to do that. Okay.